This is Soccer Today with Duane, Rollins and Kevin Laramée, live on the Sports Podcasting Network.
Good day, good night. Welcome to Soccer Today for Monday, June 22nd, 2020. I'm Kevin Laramée, joined by Duane Rollins. As always, a busy weekend of soccer. We'll get to the games we watched and, of course, more results in the second half of the show. But to start the show today, we'll look at MLS Is Back, the tournament. Group A is our focus today. All week long, we'll have a look at different teams of the Group A, and of course, we're going to have some special guests this week. Friday, we're going to talk to Jonathan Tannenwald about the NWSL tournament that is happening in Utah. So we'll talk about this on Friday. Also, Jonathan Tannenwald of the Women's Soccer Review and the Philadelphia Inquirer. But first of all, before we get started, Duane Rollins, how are you today?
I'm doing pretty well, Kevin. NWSL starting this week. That is something that I'm looking forward to watching. If you're interested, we will provide coverage of that on the show, including the preview on Friday, as you mentioned. Our more intense coverage of it will be on the Women's Soccer Review. So anyone who really, really wants us to dive deeper, listen to those shows, and we will come here and there when we're trying to cover the entire world. We will sort of parachute in and out. But certainly that is something we'll be doing. Also, obviously, previewing Group A in the MLS Is Back tournament this week. I got to tell you, Kevin, though, I'm previewing Group A not as excitedly as I would have had this been a week ago. And that's
right?
because
Let's be.
You guess. Why am I not as excited right now?
Is it 5 letters and a number at the end? Like COVID-19, because of course Florida has seen a recent spike of cases. When we say recent, the biggest since the start of this pandemic in the United States. So we will see how this affects. And of course, the NBA is a bit like a day and a half ahead of MLS when this thing's happening, and it's starting to come out in the news now that NBA players are starting to be really worried about how it's going to happen in Orlando. Of course, the NBA doesn't have hard dates like MLS has set on it, and that will be something to be addressed probably in a week if it continues to be the case. There's no indication that it won't, because it's a 7-day trend at this point. We're not doctors. We keep saying that we're not doctors. This is, of course, what we're being told and what we see. And I would suggest you follow Dr. Nipon Chopra, which is my vice president in the North American Soccer Reporters Association. But also, he's a doctor, and he will give you, in his social media, like a perspective that takes all your biases away. It's not about what you think politically this virus is or all these things. The virus doesn't care who you vote for. And I think that's important in the cases, and we see that aspect. So that will be something for sure to keep an eye on before we actually talk about Group A.
Yeah, look, those that aren't following the news and only follow soccer news, if you're unaware, as Kevin said, we talked about flattening the curve a lot in March. Well, Florida is not flattening the curve. They're creating a spike is what they're doing. It's really remarkable how many cases have come out each and every day. It looks similar, the numbers look similar to what New York City looked like back in March, and we all know how tragic that was. So that was something that is something that I think we really need to watch carefully here. And MLS, in what statements they've made, have reiterated their belief in the medical people and what their plan and what they're doing and all that. But this is before we're starting to see 3, 4, 5. They're projecting up to 6,000 cases a day into the region. Again, not a doctor, as Kevin said. There are safe ways in my mind to do a bubble scenario, but I'm not sure whether doing it in a place where they're having 6,000 cases a day, which is what they're projecting when this thing kicks off, is where that is. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm not one of those, like, we need to lock ourselves in a closet until there's a vaccine people. I am in the middle of this, probably a little more on the side of things, but I am certainly not at the extreme end of the lockdown side. And that said, I had a switch that flipped in my body on Friday where it went from, like, is this reckless for us to continue to even talk about this? But, because as long as they're projecting forward to play the tournament, we will continue to cover it.
Oh, yeah.
I got to tell you, I'm concerned. I'm very concerned.
Well, it is also a duty. Like, we're not talking about here just a recreational league thinking if they're going to start or not. We're talking about the biggest North American soccer league, one of the top, let's be fair, 6 sports league in North America, with all that entails and the amount of money that entails. So we're talking about a lot of money, investment, and of course visibility. So this is big. It's not like not big. So we'll see how it is handled. But yeah, this is worst case scenario. It was something that we all feared could happen when we go back to a few months ago and we saw the beaches and all these things reopen maybe before the time. We're not here to judge that. We're not here to say if it was or wasn't a good decision. We're just looking at the rises of cases right now and looking at the potential ramification of it, which could be an implication on MLS Is Back. And a lot of people have been asking last week and the week before, oh, what's the contingency plans? I imagine they have a plan B, a plan C, right? I'm just going to go back to the words of the Commissioner Don Garber in his conference call 2 weeks ago when this tournament was announced, around 2 weeks ago. And his comments was, when asked what is the number of cases that would trigger a halt or a contingency plan, great question by Jonathan Tannenwald of the Women's Soccer Review, of course, on the Sports Podcasting Network, that he asked the commissioner. And he answered, well, we don't have one. We don't have a certain number that would trigger a contingency plan or a contingency plan altogether. At that time, they didn't have a plan B. Maybe since then, they have put one together. It hasn't been announced, and we haven't seen proof of that. So at this point, I believe this is where things stand.
Yeah, no, I don't see much evidence yet that they're not going to continue barreling straight ahead, much like the rest of the American economy. There has been a change in direction that, back in March and April, is we have to get the curve flattened, and that, we worked with that for a while, and then now it seems to be, shrug your shoulders because we can't not have this go out. But look, it's frustrating. It's frustrating from my perspective that there doesn't seem to be a plan B in place here, and we all understand why. It's because Disney is a partner, and ESPN, which is a subsidiary of Disney, is highly involved in this, and there are the fields and the places to play down there. The fact that they haven't looked at other places is completely indicative of that sort of, commerce over common sense in my mind. That's my opinion. Others may say that they're, I'm reactionary in this case, just like we were, being reactionary, I guess, back in February when we talked about the possibility of the Olympics getting postponed, right? So we'll see. But look, the problem is, and I think what the players are going to start reacting to, is that you can't really keep a bubble complete. This isn't Biodome, that bad movie from the 90s.
Oh my God, was it ever bad? Was it ever bad? Yes, please continue.
Well, what happened at Biodome is that once it got broken, like it is though, right? Once the girls came in to party, or the boys came in to party. I forget exactly how Pauly Shore was involved, so it's not that memorable. But obviously, I'm talking about it here.
The fact that you remember Pauly Shore, it's pretty much the entirety of this. But who was the other person with Pauly Shore? That is the real trivia question that no one knows. If you don't Google it, you cannot tell me off the top of your head who the co-star was in Biodome. But this is not about soccer. Well, I guess it is.
But the idea was that once the seal was broken, all of the experiments were at the window. So once the seal is broken to these bubbles for these sports events, then all of not all of it, but a lot of what they're trying to do is no longer accomplished. So the only safe way I can see to do this is you do a test before they fly out, you test when they land, you get them straight to the bubble, and that bubble is sealed. And it's not just sealed for the players and the coaches and the media, it's also sealed for the mates.
Yeah, but that's not the case. So that's going to be a problem. Because it's not going to be the case. We know that. Yeah. It's been said by Commissioner Garber. So we'll see. So, all right, so we've talked about the doom and gloom, and we're not trying to be doom and gloomy. It is just reality here. When there's more cases and death in 24 hours than anywhere else right now in North America, and by tenfolds, if not more. And this is not exaggerated, so just look at the numbers and you'll see what we talk about. But let's take a look at, of course, the Group A, the Eastern Conference. But this week we focus more on Group A. Next week we'll look at other groups, and by the time this thing gets going in 2 weeks' time, we'll have look at most teams in this tournament. We'll have a couple of guest show over the next couple of weeks, but let's take a look overall at, of course, there's the Eastern Conference, the Western Conference, but Group A, the 6-team group that does contain the 2 expansion teams, Orlando, Chicago, who you could say maybe are 2 perennials expansion teams, Nashville, and Philadelphia. I said Nashville already, but NYCFC and Philadelphia, which are 2 heavy contenders in the Eastern Conference. So we're looking at a Group A, which is a little bit of this, a little bit of that, with salt and pepper.
Yeah, it is. Everyone recognizes, I think most people agree, that this is the weakest overall strength of the group. If this was a 14 group and it had Philadelphia and New York in it, it would kind of be at the same strength of all the rest. But because it's a 16 group and you have the 2 expansion teams in there, plus a completely rebuilding team in Chicago and a perennially struggling team in Orlando, it suddenly becomes a very concerning group in terms of the overall strength, which, then sort of is countered by the fact that when you look at the way they've set this tournament up, it's a disadvantage to be in the 16 group, but you're less likely to advance from it. There's one simple solution they could have made, which would be to guarantee the third place finisher in the group the spot into the knockout round. They did not do that. They don't do that, which continues to underline the point that I'm going to put my tinfoil hat on for a second to think that maybe these groups were designed, but that's fine. At any rate, the overall interest to me in this group, Kevin, is Philadelphia. Union have, over the last 18 months or so, been a team worth looking for and watching for, and they're not a superstar-driven team, but they are a solid team. They are a team that maybe could be a Portland in the future. You know what I mean? Like they're solid across the board. Their stars are kind of the A- type stars, but they're still good and they can still drive a team, and they could potentially be a dark horse championship team. People keep talking about dark horses in this tournament. I think it's really hard to handicap the tournament because we don't know what the motivation level is going to be for teams in the knockout stage. But if you're just going to look at this straight, I think Philadelphia, to me, is one of those true value picks, which is a little different than a true dark horse. A value pick's a team that legitimately could win it, that's going to have a significantly better odds than the favorites. And I think Philadelphia is a really interesting team here. New York, before I let you jump in, just quickly, they're the other interesting team because they've struggled in knockout stages. Is that luck? Or is it a trend? Well, after a while, you start to see, the same thing happens over and over again. So maybe, from my CFC's perspective, a very good team that has had very good regular season success is one of the Supporter Shields, was one of the Supporter Shields favorites back when the Supporter Shield was a legitimate thing that we would have looked at for this year.
Yeah.
They've struggled in knockouts, like I said. So maybe this is actually a blessing in disguise to have this sort of dress rehearsal for the actual stuff that matters, assuming they happen in the fall, and that could be interesting.
Assuming there is something in the fall, which is maybe a topic for another day when you start to read between the lines and look at what sports leagues are actually planning or not planning for the fall. Gives you another idea of the circumstances. Of course, we'll have a great guest on Miami later this week. We'll, of course, also take a look at Nashville with our friend Drake later this week. Drake Hills, of course, of the Tennessee, in which I love Drake's work over the last few. I liked it before. I still love it, but it touches me, and it's really great work by Drake in Nashville, and not just sticking to sports. And, we should learn a lot from Drake Hills. All right, so Group A, Orlando, Miami, NYCFC, Philly, Chicago, and Nashville. We know Duane, NYCFC, and Philly are clear-cut favorites in this group. Now, looking at Miami, Nashville, Chicago, and Orlando, and maybe using a bit of an Orlando perspective here, any chances that Orlando gets out of this? Either top 2 or I'll either, third place finish, yeah. Orlando, any chances?
Well, yeah. I mean, of course, I think there's a chance that any team in this tournament could get hot. I mean, we've seen teams have great months in MLS that are bad teams quite a bit. I mean, the quality difference between terrible and great is much narrower in MLS than it is in other leagues. So absolutely. I mean, I wouldn't expect it though. Orlando, one of our favorite sayings on this show is "Show me, don't tell me," and Orlando is kind of the poster child of "Show me, don't tell me" at this point, right? Like
they're on top of that mountain with the Vancouver Whitecaps right now. Like they're dominating that mountain, Orlando and Vancouver.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, the one thing people will point to is, I mean, the host situation. There's no fans there, so I don't know what that's going to mean. But I guess they'd have a slight advantage because of the heat and humidity because they're used to it. But, I mean, they're no more used to it than any of the southern teams are. The Texas teams probably have it even worse in some ways. I mean,
yeah, but
one to the other.
Usually that's an advantage, but that's an advantage because you train there all the time, right? No one's trained for the last 3 months outside, so that advantage is moot at this point because everyone's on their way to Orlando soon. Teams that haven't been able to practice, like California teams and other, like I've heard from a few journalists covering the San Jose Earthquakes that on July 24th, so 2 days from now, they will make their way to Orlando. And some teams, I heard it's also on July 26th that will make their way to Orlando if they haven't been able to practice in limited groups and some in more open fashion, depending of your local regulations and recommendations and restrictions, pretty much. So that's one thing. So if it wasn't for the recent development here in Montreal and the Impact have been able to train now in small groups and they're able to slowly train more and more intensely and things like this, so they're not going to make their way to Orlando right now, but some teams will be in Orlando in just a few days, so we'll see. Also, what if, all right, I know we're going back to COVID here, I'm tracking back here, but what if there's a team example? Let's use a San Jose. I know we're talking about Group A here, but let's use a California team because the restrictions are still pretty heavy in California. You go to Florida 2 days later, every 2 days you're going to get a test, right? So you get there, half the team has it. Well, what do? You got to pull the plug, I guess, at some point too. There will be a Rudy Gobert moment if this continues. But yeah, looking at Orlando, you mentioned the home field advantage, the heat. They haven't trained in the heat a lot like the rest of the people. Also, the way that the main field is located at ESPN's Wild World of Sports, it's mostly shaded. It's not that sunny. It actually might be sunnier for that morning game, if I remember correctly, from the Disney preseason tournament back in the day that did have games in that time slot that you could watch online. I remember watching the Montreal Impact playing game in their training kits against like the Rowdies, and although the Rowdies had their own thing at the Outlying Stadium, but against Orlando City back then because they were also involved in this. So I remember that. So maybe the morning will be a bit sunny, but mostly in the shade for the main field of ESPN's Wild World of Sports. So I don't know about the home field advantage and the heat. I really think it's going to be the team that is most established. And we've talked about this, right? So the team that is the most, I would say, consistent over the last 2 years in player personnel, but also in tactics, because after a few months off, what's going to come out of you is things that you know more, and it's muscle memory. And the tactics and schematics and the formation that you have used over the last few years, example, as a Philly NYCFC, that it's been similar over the last couple of years. There's been improvement, but I think that performance is going to come out of them. Orlando, which there wasn't a ton of changes either from last year, so there might be something there. If I'm Miami, if I'm Nashville, if I'm Chicago, like, 2 of these 3 didn't exist last year, and one of them existed in a whole different fashion on the pitch and off the pitch. So, and ownership wise, so there's a lot of different things here. And I think that in a tournament like this, you do not have time to establish instincts and chemistry, and that will cost you. So I guess I answered my own question.
Yeah, I mean, quickly, just to touch on the Heat situation, teams are going to go down to Orlando relatively early. I mean, unless they change their mind. And I have heard some rumors that some teams are going to wait to the very last second to go down to try and avoid exposing their players to the risk down there. But that said, Kevin, I'm in one of the most northern flyer markets in the country. You're a little further north. Technically Seattle's further north, Vancouver's further north, but by and large, Toronto is north. 33 Celsius today. That's the high. That's 92 Fahrenheit. It's not quite 103 like it might be down there, but it's not cool. So I think they're used to training in this, right? So kind of put that aside.
And when you say it's not cool for multiple reasons. Because when I'm doing shows right here, I got to turn the AC off in the studio. And as you can tell on my face, there's a lot of lights here. So yeah, it's anything but cool right now in this studio also.
Yeah, we're in a heat wave, which again, for our American listeners, is 92 Fahrenheit is the high this afternoon. So there you go. That's hot by any measure. At any rate, what you said is bang on, though. The teams I believe that are going to be successful in this are the teams that have a veteran presence, that have experience. There is an inclination to think that if you're dealing with a short sprint, condensed games, a shortened season, a crunch season, that younger teams will do well. A lot of people, that seems like something that makes sense. But what we found in other leagues where they've done that, I think even the Bundesliga played this out to a certain extent. Like, what team was most dominant? What team hasn't lost in it? That's Bayern Munich, right? And they've just been a machine, even when they kind of rotate. And that's, they're younger, but they also have a lot of experience around the institutional experience there. If you go way back to 94, which I know was a long time ago, but 94 in the NHL, when they had a very condensed season, the teams that were successful then were very veteran. When you look at the NBA, which was a little more recent, when they had a condensed season, the teams that were successful were veterans. I believe the Spurs were the champions that year. Correct me if I'm wrong, but
I wouldn't know, but I'm taking your word for it.
Yeah, there are others that follow the sports much closely that have talked about this, particularly within the context of that, and they all agree that it goes counterintuitive to this idea that young people do better in this kind of condensed area. No, it's people that know how to manage their bodies, that can rely on familiarity within the team. That is what to look for. So when I look at this to get it back to the Group A, it is hard to bet against the teams that are most consistent in terms of their roster. So you're looking at Philadelphia and NYCFC. I know it's a boring pick, but they are the most stable teams. They are the most talented teams in there, and it is hard to bet against them. In terms of a third place pick, it's kind of up in the air. I mean, Chicago, as you mentioned, is as much an expansion team as the two expansion teams. The expansion teams are expansion teams.
If not more, because the expansion teams almost started building their team before Chicago did. So, anyways.
Yeah, and so really it comes down to Orlando, and whether you believe that Orlando has enough to be a solid third or to challenge for the top three in there because of their advantages that may or may not be there. And again, show me, don't tell me. I'm actually most inclined, when I look at all six of those teams, like I said, I think Philly and New York are, destined to be, 6 to 9 points each between those two. And then for the rest, because of the sort of conservative nature that we saw them play in the first couple games, I might even give Nashville more of a nod than the rest, but it's really flipping a coin at that point because there's a lot of questions for all of those other teams.
Oh yeah, and we're let's not forget also, I feel some teams, and forgive me for using this analogy, but we'll punt this tournament. Some teams will be like, you know what? We weren't expecting to be good this season anyways. We've been struggling. There's things happening. Here you go. We're just coming here because we need to take, we don't want to get fined. So that's why we're here. I feel there's going to be a team or two that, I'm not going to overly say it, but is there really going to be consequences about this if you fail in your 3 games? Example, you're the Vancouver Whitecaps. You lose 3 games. Mark Dos Santos, will he be fired because of this tournament? Maybe because of what's happening behind the scenes. Who knows? And maybe that's not a good example, I'm saying. But if you're a good team like Toronto FC and you lay an egg in 2 of these 3 games, unfortunately you don't get out, which I don't think is going to happen, but I'm just using it as an example. Is there consequences to it? You're just like, well, weird circumstances brought us this tournament, and we're not going to put too much into it, and we're going to continue our long-term vision. I don't think this tournament should affect your long-term vision as a club, development of your players, and especially the way you want these players to play in the long run. So yeah, I do feel that some teams maybe won't take this tournament in the same seriousness as others, and that being said, the same could be said for the opposite of this spectrum. Some teams that are not expected to do well this season will have surprising results and will come out of these groups, and maybe it is a team from Group A that will go out to have success. Maybe a team like Miami with a couple of new additions, or you get hot, you get a good result in your first game, and then you get a draw and you qualify for the second turn, and you never know what can happen. We've seen this in World Cup situations, so of course there's always that scenario as a possibility.
Yeah, no, I mean, you mentioned Toronto there as an example, and 100%. Toronto goes 0-3 in the group stage. That's going to be very disappointing, particularly if there is a regular season and suddenly they're behind the 8 ball a great deal. They'd be on 4 points after 5 games of a 20-game season, and that is a little bit more underlined by the fact that there's a shorter time to make those points up. So teams that believe that they're going to be contenders for a title in a regular kind of season, a regular season, if you like, are going to want to be good in that group stage. When they get to the knockout, all bets are off. We don't know what the priorities are going to be for anyone. So that's a different sort of thing. I think when you look at those teams that we talked about as being MLS Cup contenders at the start of the season, so your Seattles, your LAFCs, your TFCs, your NYCFCs in this particular group stage, they are going to want to do well, and there probably is a little more pressure on that. But at the same time, as you say, this is already going to be it's not going to be a forgotten season. I think in the end, everyone's going to remember who wins this tournament just because it's such a funny thing.
It's a forgiven season. That's how I view it. You're forgiven.
Yeah, no one's going to remember. Sorry to interject. No one's going to remember who did badly in this tournament, though.
Exactly. No one will be like, oh, you remember these teams that were supposed to be good, they didn't really play well? No one will remember that because they'll be forgiven of the results if they're bad. And that's how I view this also. And that's a great point that we need to continue to keep in mind when we analyze this tournament and the groups is there. It's all about how the players approach it, and that could make a difference. If the money, a team of example, there's going to be academy players playing in this that haven't played before. There's going to be players that are superstars that for some family and health reasons do not participate in this. Carlos Vela. So, you're going to have different results here. So you might have a team of players not expecting to do well. Maybe Orlando with a few kids, because we're looking at Orlando a bit more today, just in the mindset. And maybe you'll get that results, and maybe you make it further down the road than you expect, and maybe you get a little piece of that $1.1 million pool, and maybe you find yourself as an academy player with a little chunk of change of $30,000 as a check when you split it all during the team or something. That is an incentive when you think about it, when you're 20-year-old and you're thinking, am I going to play am I going to give it all for this tournament? Well, if you're going to tell me I'm going to get a little check of $30,000 at the end of this, maybe I will.
Yeah, no, for sure. As I've said, I'm inclined to believe that the teams that are going to be most successful in this tournament are the teams that have a little bit more of a window closing on them. At the risk of sounding like a homer, I think TFC is one of the favorites in the tournament because TFC objectively looks at their window and says, we have about a year and a half left before we're going to need to significantly rebuild. I mean, most people in Toronto recognize that. It's an older team. It's a team that was built to win this year. They can't afford to slip up, even in whatever silliness this season looks like, right? But there is an alternative measure. You could look at a team like, say, Colorado. I know we're talking about Group A, but what the hell, here we are. Colorado is a team that a lot of people look at as a dark horse. They finished last season very well. I have some doubts about that I'll talk about when we talk about their group, but that's just put them on a shelf. They finished very well. They have a new coach. They're young. Everyone thinks maybe this is a team that could maybe put something together in a short run and get it done. there is an argument in my mind that I will listen to. I don't necessarily agree with it right now, but I will listen to it that says that those kind of teams that are in that middle, that are good but not great, that they may look at this as a weird season that gives them an opportunity they might not have over 34 games. 34 games, cream rises. Likely we're going to be a low seed. We're going to have a big run to get into an MLS final. But in a short run, in 20 games, 18 games, 15 games, or however many they can squeeze in before a playoff, maybe we have a chance. And this is a good opportunity for us to find something. The team that I pointed to as my dark horse that I really like because of the style that they play are the Earthquakes. Again, we looked at how successful they were for half of the season, right? And then they kind of fell off a cliff. Well, they have an opportunity to get in a short run to do a similar thing. So there is that. That said, as I've said now for the third time and final time this show, look for the Greybeards. That's who I'm going to pick in this tournament because I think that they're just going to have the savvy and the desperation because of their closing window to get stuff done. And
as is the case over the last few years in Major League Soccer, when in doubt, it's either Seattle or Toronto. All right, on that note, we'll take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll look at some of the games we watched last weekend.
You are listening to Soccer Today. Follow us on Twitter at Soccer Today SPN and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Sports Podcasting Network. You can find the podcast version of all the shows we do on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Google Play Store, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you get your podcast.
And we're back on Soccer Today. Kevin Laramée with Duane Rollins. As always, you can find the Two Solitude Soccer podcasts on our premium podcast platform on Patreon at patreon.com/sports podcasting network. And on our Patreon page, you will find the Two Solitude Soccer podcast where Duane and I go deep every week on Canadian soccer with Canadian Premier League, Canadian national teams, women, men, semi-pro leagues, PLSQ. We'll talk about League One Ontario and more on the Two Solitude Soccer podcast, the most listened premium podcast on Canadian soccer in Canada. Okay, there might be 3 in the categories, but hey, you never dismiss anything. Duane, let's look at some matches we watched this weekend. It was a return of the Premier League last week, and we had some great matches this weekend. First Saturday with games, and I have to say, I'm a little bit disappointed. Come on, Sheffield United. You had a good opportunity, but you laid an egg. You got a red card, and you lost 3-0 against Newcastle yesterday. That is unfortunate. That was your chance, and I think the manager of Sheffield United puts it perfectly when he says, forget about the Champions League. What were you thinking about? What about this result? This was about it. And now, let's just make sure we don't lose our place in the Premier League table.
Yeah, well, I mean, they're in a weird place, Sheffield United, in the sense that we don't know what's going to happen with the City appeal. So we don't know whether 5th is going to be a Champions League. We can speculate that it might be. I, even speaking as a City supporter, can say that I am anticipating that they will lose the appeal. I don't think they're going to lose the full appeal, but I think that they're going to at least lose 1 year of it. So I suspect 5th will be, but it isn't. So how, it's challenging for those teams that are in or around there, whether to be motivated to whatever level. And the bigger point I would see, though, with Sheffield United's performance with the 3-0 loss to Newcastle is you're looking at a team at Newcastle that's desperate more than Sheffield United. And Sheffield United is staying up. There's no doubt about that. Newcastle is not necessarily staying up, and we've seen some points at the bottom of the table since the restart, and they needed those points. So they're a little more desperate to begin with. They're also fresher. There's lots of teams are fresh, but when you were playing that first game after the long break, there's a little bit of sort of excitement that might throw you through. It's always, think about when you play in your own beer league, right? After you've been off for 4 months. The first game back, you're excited, you kind of blast through it, but then you have that muscle memory kicks in. So when you play a game 4 days later, you're not quite as good.
And when you say muscle memory, also you remember how every muscle hurts after the first game. And when you get to the second, like, oh yeah, I have a muscle there and it hurts.
Yeah, and you had a Sheffield United team that was playing its second game versus a Newcastle team that was playing its first game. So I think that might have been a factor as well in that. Look, I think the overall vision I've had about this, and I find this interesting, is that the Premier League teams, of the three major leagues that have restarted, four now. I wasn't able to watch into Serie A yesterday. I plan to watch some on replay tonight just to get a feel for the league. But of the three major teams, the leagues that I have seen so far, the Spanish league is the one that has looked the most normal. The Bundesliga settled in pretty quickly, and the Premier League has lagged quite a bit behind. I don't know whether that is a reflection of the styles of those leagues, and it could be. That is my working theory, because La Liga is a very technical league, and you don't need as much fitness, underlying fitness, to play a technical game, whereas the Premier League is the most physical of those leagues. You need to be playing at the breakneck speed that they normally play at. It takes a while to get up to that. So, as I said to Kevin off air before the show started, the Premier League games this weekend that I watched seemed very... They were like watching... Part of this is sunny weather and, the no lack of fans in the crowd and all that. It seemed like I'm watching preseason games. There was, from a normal year.
An international Champions Cup feel to these games because of the empty stands also.
Yeah, exactly.
I have to say that's a joke, because I've seen International Champions Cup with full stadiums. I know, but I've also seen it with none. So there you go.
Yeah, well, yeah, and they're friendlies. They're exhibitions to generate revenue is what I'll call them. And but this is not, and it does have that vibe to it though in terms of the quality. That said, there were great moments. Look at that. The Brighton Arsenal game, which I don't know if Arsenal fans are going to look at as a great moment, but it was a highly entertaining end of the game on Saturday with 2 goals very late to win that thing for Brighton out of the, from the depth. And they're talking about a team that desperately needs points, right?
Yeah.
To stay up. So that was fun. Then you have the other side of it. I didn't find the two marquee games of the weekend, Spurs United on Friday, and then the Merseyside Derby on Sunday. The Spurs United had a bit of vibe to it. Everton Liverpool, it didn't, right? It was a disappointment. It fell a little flat. That's going to happen.
If you're Liverpool, you haven't really performed in 3 months the way you're supposed to, right? And you were at the top of maybe your history. And now you're looking at, all right, Champions League's in August. So the Premier League is basically a walkthrough for us for the Champions League.
They're out of the Champions League, though. So they really
they are. Well, that's how much importance I remember of the Champions League, So there you go. I apologize.
The very last game played.
Barcelona, right? Yeah.
Eliminated them.
That's true.
So they're in a very funny position that way, because Liverpool doesn't have anything they're gearing up for.
Oh, yeah.
Really, when you're talking about Liverpool, they have to get 5 more points now or have between them winning and City dropping 5 more points will clinch them the title, their first title. That has meant a lot to them. It's got to be a bit of a disappointment. They can't celebrate it with fans, but they still want to get the job done. But in the meantime, they're not gearing up towards Champions League re-entry. We don't know when next season's going to start in the Premier League. It might not be till October. So they're really, they just don't know. They're in a weird zone. They're going to get it done. It's not be crazy in terms of like them losing 8 in a row or something. But it might not look as pretty as it certainly did. And it's speaking as a neutral here for a second, it is sad that this is how it ends. I know if you hate Liverpool, and there are a lot of people that do, you're probably laughing a little bit that there's going to be an asterisk beside their title, but I'm not. What they did was remarkable, and they deserved the opportunity to have that moment in front of their fans, which are very loyal. I don't know how hard done by they are. They've won 2 Champions League titles in the stretch that they haven't won a league title. So this isn't exactly Leicester City again, but it is a significant marker for them. And they're not going to have that, and they're not going to be able to celebrate what was going to be a remarkable season. They already lost the undefeated possibility with the Watford loss late before the shutdown, so that was about 2 weeks before the shutdown. So what are they playing for? playing the 100 points, I don't think they're going to get hit that. I think they're going to lose a few more games the rest of the way, and I actually suspect that the final gap will be something closer to, it's 20 now. I think it's
closer to 10?
It's going to probably be 15, 14, around there is probably what it'll be. I think City, based on what I saw that first game, we'll watch them this afternoon at 3 o'clock against Burnley, because they are playing for the Champions League still. They do need to gear things up. They play a technical game, and Pep will not let their players sleep. I suspect that they will probably grind it or win it out, and so I can see that gap closing. But yeah, it's a weird situation for Liverpool.
And of course, we're saying that it's too bad that they're not going to celebrate them. If there's an over-under pool, or at least if there's a money to be put on, will fans gather even they're not supposed to celebrate? Yeah, it's probably going to happen too. You know that. There's going to have to be some intervention by authorities to stop these gathering with celebration. Let's take a quick look at some results in the Bundesliga and Liga before we say goodbye for today. We've already been talking for a long time. Bayern Munich, again, 3-1 victory. Alphonso Davies, the best rookie, I guess, of the year in the season in the Bundesliga. Best young player in the Bundesliga over the last 12 months for the Canadian Roadrunner.
Meep. Yeah. I love that it's meep, not beep, because of the mistake. But anyway.
Because the German and lost in translation, and I guess when you watch it in German, it's meep. I guess, but not here. But it's okay. We still love you, Thomas Miller.
It works better. Better. Anyway. In terms of, in terms of his winning the Young Player of the Year award, they don't really have rookies in the same way we do here, but the Young Player of the Year, I mean, there's no shock there. He was obviously, Holland would be the other possible person there. What I find interesting, an interesting intellectual exercise, is to start looking at all of the under 21 players in Europe. There are a couple major awards that a Canadian has never been, we couldn't even dreamed of them being in the running for in the past, including the Golden Boy Award, which is the most famous and prestigious of them.
Well, you mean the trophy that Mbappe won last time?
Yeah. I have to put Alphonso Davies in as a favorite of that. It'd be, who else would win it this year? Holland. Would that be it's basically the same, and he's already
beat him.
On him.
Yeah, it's not bad that you beat maybe the most prolific goal scorer over the last 4 months of competition, at least in the Bundesliga, not bad.
Yeah. I was listening to Dan Ricci's podcast, Kicking the Grass, with Jeff Blair this week. I was catching up on those and learning. It's a worthwhile interview show for sure. If you have the time to listen to those, you should. They had a whole show where they talked about Alphonso Davies, and Dan said, and maybe we'll have Dan on soon to talk about the Whitecaps situation, but Dan said in that particular show that the ceiling for Alphonso Davies, and something Canadian fans have to get used to, and we have still struggled with, his ceiling is the Ballon d'Or. I think that's hard because of where he plays. It's rare that you're going to have a player back there that's going to be in running for that, but there is truth to the, sorry, before you jump in, there is truth to the underlying notion that the ceiling is the top of the game, the very top of the game, not some kind of middle ground. Like you talk about, I don't know, Jonathan Osorio. His ceiling would be maybe that he could be an MLS All-Star, right? Like there's a limitation to it. There's no limitations to what Alphonso Davies' ceiling is. And that's the point.
Can you imagine, though, if as a left back, he wins the Ballon d'Or? It means he revolutionizes the way this position is played, which he's already kind of been doing. So, yeah, this could become really useful. Of course, there were some great games in the league, but we're running out of time for today. You know the results. You can Google them. You can find them if you're wondering. We're not the biggest La Liga experts anyways. We wanted to make sure we talked to you about the things that we watched this weekend. And I have to be honest, La Liga is behind the Bundesliga and the Premier League right now. So I guess there is a Alphonso Davies effect, not only on Sportsnet ratings with the Bundesliga, and by the way, the Bundesliga signed a new contract with DAZN in Germany, Switzerland, and another European country for exclusive rights, and that's a big thing. You can find out more. We'll probably talk about it more in the next couple of days and how this has some ramification. DAZN, even though they did have some financial problems during the pandemic and still trying to recover financially from the loss of a lot of revenues over the last 3 months, are making another big deposit of money on sports rights in Europe this time. So that'll be a fascinating topic. But for today, Duane, I think I'm gonna take it easy. We had a lot of soccer over the last few weeks, and I kind of need an afternoon without it, I guess.
Well, City plays this afternoon, so I will not have an afternoon without it. But I also have Barcelona this afternoon for those that are into that sort of things.
Yeah, no, exactly. All right, fine. I'll watch City this afternoon too, and we'll talk about it tomorrow, of course, with more on the world of football with a soccer perspective. You can follow Duane on social media at 24th Minute, myself at Kev Laramée, and this show at Soccer Today SPN, live around 11 a.m. Monday to Friday on our Twitter feed at Soccer Today SPN, and of course, podcasts available everywhere you get your podcasts. Also on our YouTube page, which go ahead and subscribe. It really helps us when you subscribe to YouTube and when you subscribe to also our podcast feeds. Those are the best way you can support us in a non-financial matter, is to subscribe to our podcast, like our videos on YouTube. It's actually really good for the algorithm. So like our videos on YouTube and subscribe to our YouTube page, and of course to our podcast and our Twitter, of course. And these are the best ways to support us non-financially. And if you want to get the Two Soccer podcast and support us financially, you can do so at patreon.com/sports podcasting network. But as always, until tomorrow, for Duane Rollins, I'm Kevin Laramée, and we wish you a great soccer.